Now that we have our construction lines laid out for our points, let's talk about adding grids to our model. Grids within SDS2 are views in your 3D model. So once we create our grids, we will be able to open any of those views and view them or model in them as well. To add a grid line, go ahead and go up to your File pull down under Views Grids and select Add Grid Line. You can also use the keyboard shortcut GS, or on your default toolbar, your Add Grid Line is in the upper left of your toolbar. With that command started, I want to make sure I use intersection of construction lines, and then I'm going to start picking my points to define my grid locations. When you're creating a grid, the order you pick your points from left to right, or right to left, or bottom to top, or top to bottom, affects which way the view will be looking in your 3D model. If I go ahead and try to define my grid A here, which is running along this vertical line, if I start from bottom and go up, you'll see that there is an arrow pointing to the left. This shows you the direction in which the view is going to be created. If I select my second point, I will get my new view window. This is where I can define the view. I'm going to go ahead and say A. Auto pin to this view is for member pins. By default, member pins are disabled. Member pins can be used to pin to other members or views, so if one member or view moves, other members will be moved with it. By default, the member pins are disabled, like I stated. These can be turned off and then auto pinned to any view that has this auto pin checkbox on. For our basic training, we're not going to be using any auto pinning, and since the pins are disabled to start with, it doesn't matter if this is checked or not. But if you do not want this to ever be able to be auto pinned to, you can uncheck this, and then anytime you auto pin, it will not be a valid view to pin to. We also have finite. Because we picked two specific points, we will have a finite grid line between those exact points we picked. We have a grid bubble setback of how far we want our grid bubble to display in the model, and the relative view depth top and bottom. This is the elevations in which this grid will be visible. So I want this to go from 99.2, which is the bottom of base plate for our model, and I want it to go up above our third floor. Our third floor is at 126.0, so I'm just going to go ahead and type in 130-0 to put it above the top of the roof. This is a primary grid. We have secondary, dimension only, and placement only. These allow you to turn on and off the specific view types within display options here, as well as secondary, dimension only give us different detailing results in our erection view detailing. We'll talk more about that when we actually get to detailing erection views. Our depth check is the default in and out of that view. In this case, on grid line A, 3 foot in and out will be left and right of that plane that we create. I'm going to check this on by default. And then our grid pen line color and grid line type will be the line type and color of the grid in the model, as well as what pen, color, and line type is used for detailing and erection view details. Make this view my default, which we already talked about when creating the very first view in the model. We'll make this the view that your model will always open to when you launch your modeling window. And for detailing, we'll put it into a separate for detailing list. We're going to leave all these unchecked at the bottom here and just say OK. You'll see that now I have grid line A and I can add another grid. So if I move over here 25 feet and pick grid line B, I can simply type in B and it remembers from the last grid I added. So I can say OK, and then I have grid line B. There's also a point locator like base construction line, but specifically for grids, which is base grid line. If I use this command and select the grid that I have in my model, it will offset from that grid, whatever dimension I type in here. So I type in 25.0. The new grid line will say is C, and it remembers all the information from the grid I'm basing from. If I say add, it'll add my C in here. I can come in here and also type D and say add again, and it puts it another distance from the last one. So I can come in here and say 20.0, and say the last one here is E, and say add. When I'm done, I can hit cancel, and then I'm out of my actual grid add command. So if I wanted to add my grids horizontally, I would come up here and start my add grid again, change my point locator back to intersection of construction line, and I'll go ahead and define my points left to right, so I'm looking from the bottom up. We'll call this grid 3, setbacks at 6'0". I'm going to go ahead and make my top 130'0", primary, in and out at 3 foot, and say OK. And the same for grid line 2 and grid line 1. If I look at my views here, I have an A.3, a 1.9, and a 2.1. So if I wanted to create my points here for A.3, I can make this a secondary. And if I wanted to differentiate that from my other views, I can make the grid bubble setback different. Let's say I want to make that 3 foot. And if I wanted to, I can make a different pen color or line type for my secondary grids. We're going to leave these default, but if you'd like to change those, feel free. When I say OK, you can see that it pulls it back not quite as far from the points I picked. I can do the same for grid lines 1.9 and 2.1. When I'm done adding my grids, I can right-click to say I'm done, and now I have a majority of my grids in my model.